Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libre Planet. My name is Bob, and I'll be the room monitor for this session. We're about to begin the talk, Public Invention, Free Hardware Inventions in the Public, for the Public, by Robert L. Reed and Marc Jones. Thank you very much, and please begin your presentation.
Hi. Thank you for the introduction. So as we're introduced, my name is Marc Jones. I'm the Secretary for Public Invention, and I'm presenting with Rob Reed, who's the President of Public Invention. Our talk today is going to be giving an overview of public invention and what we mean by free and Libre hardware inventions. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Rob, to start us off.
Thank you. So we're going to start by talking about some projects, but the latter part of this talk is very much focused on issues that will be interesting to the free software community. We'd first like to thank the Free Software Foundation for putting on a great conference under difficult circumstances. So waterborne diseases kill 3.4 million people every year. I'm going to be talking about COVID-19 a little bit later. Bacterial analysis is done in laboratories, often very far away from the rural places where waterborne diseases kill people, and it takes many days to accomplish a bacterial test. If someone invented a way to detect E. coli and thereby fecal contamination in drinking water in only 6 hours, and if this methodology were freely and legally published, not patented or private in any way, so that everyone could immediately benefit from it. Next slide, please. Then we would be able to decrease the time to detect bacteria in water and indicator organisms of contamination in water. If this were made available at a hobby level of capital expenditure using free software and free hardware, then water engineers would be able to do their job more easily and save a significant portion of those 3.4 million people. That is, in essence, the nutshell of public invention. That's what we're attempting to do. We're attempting to take the principles of the Free Software Foundation and extend them to the development of hardware, by which we don't mean chip design. We've already accomplished this in some ways. A team that started out with Engineers Without Borders and is sort of overlaps with Public Invention, constructed an incubator, which when we quit sharing the slides, I'll show you the actual device that's behind me right now, which was taken to Iraq and used to analyze water in various places there. As you probably know, in Iraq, electricity is very unreliable, and you're often very far away from a laboratory. Bacterial samples have to begin incubation and testing quickly. So what is needed is a portable, battery-powered way to perform this test. And we've done that, which cuts the effective time down to 48 hours instead of, for example, 4 or 5 days. But our goal is to cut it down to 6 hours so that it can be done on-site by one engineer within one working period. Or possibly it could be made even faster. Next slide, please. So that project overlaps the wonderful keynote we had about Public Lab in the sense that it's a scientific instrument, but we do a lot of other things at Public Invention. In fact, we published 45 ideas, all of which are completely given away to the world, and anybody can work on those right now. They're at our GitHub repository. But my board asked me to produce a short list of things, and often, like software projects, what's important depends on who you have volunteers to work on. So I'm very happy to announce that Chris Ferguson has become the coach, which is what we call the project lead, of the Rapid E. coli Detection Project, which is what I was just talking about. I, along with a graduate student who's going to Auburn next year, work on the Tetracon robot control system, which I'll show. I'm also very proud of it's more closer to a full software project called Math Tablet that is coached by David Jeschke, which is still kind of in early phases, but a lot of work has been put into that And then we are actually finishing up a project called Segmented Helices, which is pretty much a pure math project. Next slide, please. So about 20 years ago, at Rensselaer Polytechnic, Professor Sanderson proposed building robots that can change their shape based on tetrahedra made out of shafts which can make themselves shorter or longer, or actuators. The models that they built were about the size of a pickup truck and extremely expensive. That was proposed specifically for exploration of the surface of Mars, in order to make a machine which could serve multiple functions, because of course it's very expensive to lift every kilogram to Mars. So the idea was to develop a very light, strong machine, which I'll call a robot, although we're not really interested in artificial intelligence. It's really more of a machine, based on this geometric principle that would allow it to be really revolutionary in the sense that it's a polymorphic tentacle. Next slide, please. However, one of the problems with building a non-rectilinear system like that is that it's actually very hard to control. So if you imagine having a full tentacle, like an octopus tentacle, just mathematically describing what you want to do with it is a little bit of a challenge. So a separate project that we have created is to create a puppet. And at the end of the talk, I'll show you what we have here. The basic idea is to make something you can hold in your hand and manipulate in a way which is intuitive to a human being, and have the larger robot do that. Next slide, please. And so this is a picture of the 7 tetrahedron controller, which you'll see at the end of the talk, which is actually exactly the same shape, although it doesn't appear to be the same, but on a much smaller scale than the robot, which I will also show you at the end of the talk. And so we've recently had a little bit of success with this. The robot can walk. It can be controlled with the controller to pick up a 3-pound weight, and it can walk carrying the 3-pound weight, and it only weighs 16 pounds. So that's actually quite a success. Next slide, please. So here's an example of how we would like the robot to be used. You're manipulating the puppet, and the larger robot, which you can see there in the photo, moves as you move the puppet. And so, as was originally suggested, you could use this to make a walking bridge. Obviously, it would have to be larger than the robot that we've made right now, but you could make a bridge that could crawl off a truck across a chasm, arch itself up, and then simply become a structural object which stays still but allows you to span the chasm. Or you could make a bulldozer or a crane. Next slide, please. But I really want to be Dr. Octopus. If we had the controller and the robot tentacles working, it would be possible to make a Dr. Octopus-like extension of the body. Now, of course, that's slightly humorous in some ways, but if we had control of general purpose, very strong, light tentacles, we could make search and rescue robots better than we can make today. And we could even make agricultural robots that would be more efficient than tractors, because they wouldn't have to move along the surface of the soil if they were mounted on a mast. So this technique could have major implications for the environment in terms of carbon reduction, and also allow us to do things that are very difficult to do with earth-moving equipment today. Next slide, please. Another project that we're working on is Math Tablet, and it's being coached by another person. It's mostly software, although it is a stylus-based system. And so the idea is to make a mathematical assistant that looks over your shoulder as you're working, to allow very sophisticated mathematics, more or less from elementary algebra or high school level up. And it is capable, in theory, of working with a variety of computer algebra systems. In fact, we're using Mathematica right now. Next slide, please. So we have a bunch of other projects that we would do if we had enough resources and coaches for them. We'd like to make a more efficient heating pot. This would have major implications for alleviating poverty and also reducing carbon footprint and pollution. We'd like to make a single chamber biochar producing stove. We'd also like to do some pure software projects, like building a proper interactive model of all of the chemical aspects of human waste processing. And then finally, a little bit more fun and a little wilder, we have a project to try to build safer flying machines that obviously we would start with a small scale version of it. But the idea would be to attempt to build machines which are safe enough that they could actually be used within a city. Next slide, please. So all of these things are potentially designed to eliminate poverty or relieve poverty and fight deforestation, possibly to sequester carbon and improve the soil. The whole point of this is that in the end, technology is not neutral. As Buckminster Fuller pointed out back in the 50s and 60s, we as technologists have tremendous power. We can choose what to do with our energy. We can choose to be humanitarian makers, or as I would call it, we can choose to be public inventors. I think it's over to you now, Mark.
So we view public invention as the kind of the latest step, or what we hope to be the latest step in a long tradition of American invention. Right? America has a proud tradition of being scientific and moving things forward, and doing that in a humanitarian way. Right? One of our most renowned founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, invented amazing things across a wide range of different areas. Right? Invented the fire department, the first free public libraries, the Franklin stove, electric rods. And that range of invention that he did is how we view invention, right? It's not just about creating specific patentable devices, but you can see from the examples that Rob talked about, we want to encourage the creation of a lot of things. And the thing that links them together is that they're humanitarian in scope. This isn't just something that you're like looking up to Benjamin Franklin. That's part of a long tradition, right? Jonas Salk created the first polio vaccine, right? He didn't make a lot of money off that. He gave that away because it was something that changed the world, right? We don't have to worry about polio anymore, but it used to be a real thing in the United States, right? Swimming pools were scary places because children who went into swimming pools got polio and died or became permanently disabled. By releasing that vaccine publicly, making it available so everyone access to it, he changed the United States, he changed the world. And then there are other inventors like Buckminster Fuller, right? Again, another genius who touched so many different things. He patented a lot of stuff, but he licensed it freely to those in need so that make sure his inventions were created in a way that could help humanity across wide swaths of people. Now, we view this as in the same tradition that Richard Stallman came along when he created the free software movement in the 1980s as doing something, again, this was about helping people. It was about making the world a better place. The latest incarnation of that we see as being in the free software, free culture movement. But that's just because the technology today that's accessible to people is information technology, computer software programming. What we want to do is expand those ideas and values and bring that back to a larger area where we can think about what else can we create? What can we create that makes the world a better place? If we started thinking about invention in this tradition of we're not just making things to build our next company and not just the next startup, how do we get VC capital funding? But what if we were trying to invent things that were just to help other people? What new things would we invent? What new things would be easy to invent if we were thinking about it from how can we help humanity? So our organization, what we're viewing it as, is really as a way of helping people and encouraging them to take that invention. So we have lots of ideas that are out there, and part of that is to encourage a movement, right? So if you see one of our ideas, these are ideas that we believe and are working on, and we're looking to build a movement and bring in more volunteers. Or if you see one of our ideas and you want to take it and go do it on your own outside of our organization, we're fine with that too. What we really want to do is encourage invention and humanitarian interest. So what is public invention to us? It's more than just innovation, right? It's got to be useful to humanity, right? It's not just about inventing things, but it's about inventing things for the public interest. That's what makes us a charitable organization, is that we're not driven by profit motivations, but we're trying to bring this to the point where humanitarianism is the main point of it, and kind of bring the maker movement to kind of like a pinnacle of what it could be. It's not just about building like a new alarm clock or something to just work on the weekend because it's a hobby and you get to play with toys, but how can we take the passion and desires that come from the free software movement, where people are creating things on their own, bringing them into the physical world like the maker movement did, but then also thinking about that from that ethical and moral point of view, and directing towards the hobbyist activities towards useful things, right? You don't need to have a PhD to create these things. If you have a passion, a skill, and the resources and times, you can make better things. The incubator project is, I think, a great example of that, because it didn't require new inventions in that sense that you're like, oh, it's patentable, or that it required millions of dollars of research. A lot of that was just taking off-the-shelf components and assembling in a way with a useful application. We want to encourage this to be a broad movement too, right? So that lots of people try it. So you don't have to go into this knowing that you can succeed, but it's okay to fail, right? That's what separates great inventors from people who never invented anything at all. There's lots of terrible ideas that were thrown out there, but they kept trying at it until they found something useful. It's like, try this and see if it succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, try something else. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is to create a movement where it's safe to do those kind of things. So the risk of failure is not something to be feared. It's an opportunity to learn a lesson. So, and we're also looking at trying to encourage the exploration of underexplored ideas, right? So think about the things that have been created in the last 100 years. And can those be applied in new ways, right? So for the incubator project, a lot of that was you can buy that stuff as off the shelf, but it's looking at it again and going, well, what if I was trying to solve, clean water problems and I didn't want to create anything new? I just wanted to buy off the shelf components. Can I take things that already exist and assemble them in a new way that serves that purpose, where I can do it relatively cheaply? So it's that underexplored part of engineering, is what can I do with existing things and create a new application by recombining them or just using it differently. The idea here is, the larger idea is that we want to create public invention, small p, small I, as a new way of creating things in the world, so that it doesn't just have to be for-profit firms that are trying to create inventions so they can sell them and make profit. It doesn't have to come through classical research universities where there's a lot of gatekeepers behind it, because you have to have a PhD, you have to get grant funding, there's a high bar, and it can only be those things that people are going to be like, well, if I invest $1 million in this, what am I going to get? I have to make sure that I'm putting my $1 million to the best use. But is there a way of inventing things that don't create a lot of money? Maybe aren't necessarily the big flashy projects that are being eligible for a grant, maybe not the kind of things that are going to advance someone's academic career, but are the kind of things that someone with a passion and a weekend once a month can invest their time into it, and create a new way that new things can be created. So building on that maker movement and bringing a social purpose to it, so it's not just a hobby that people are dealing with in their free time, but something they can direct towards the larger benefit of society. So invention without capital or monopoly. So how do we get resources to invent without a profit mode in doing it? Well, we look at the free software movement, and this is why we're at LibrePlanet today, and looking at all of the value that the free software movement has already created in the world, right? The last time I saw an estimate of value around free software with the Debian project, I think it was valued at like $2.3 billion for the Debian project. For people in the audience who are familiar with Debian, that's an entirely community-run project. Very few people get paid to work on it. Very few people are lucky enough to get paid to work on it. Most of it is volunteers, but they come together as a community to create that value because they care about the community. They care about adding value to the rest of the world. there's opportunities to do that, right? We know from the free software movement, there's ways of creating things that don't necessarily have to be profit motive. And it's fantastic today. We see lots of companies engaging in the development of free software because they realize there's a new way to create software that doesn't have to be directed entirely towards their bottom line. And they get more value out of it too. But the point of free software, right, is the freedom part, right? We all know that. That's why we're at LibrePlanet. It's free software, right? It's not open source. It's about enhancing people's freedoms. And that's what public invention is to us too, is there's other ways of motivating people to do that. So if we can encourage people to participate in the invention process without having to give them financial rewards, but appeal to their altruistic side, that's what we want to do. And we're at a time now where this is a cultural moment where this can happen, right? We have lots of resources to enable public invention. You know, there are so many things now that are programmable. Because software has become ubiquitous in our society, because so many devices are general purpose, a lot of invention can be done by repurposing existing general purpose devices using programming. We have things like 3D printers, right, which brings that general purpose nature to the material world. And we see people out there right now doing things like biohacking. You wanted to encourage around. There's an appetite for the kind of creativity to be done at a citizen level or an individual level. But we need to also think about, this isn't just about how to make something cool. We should be thinking about how can we put our efforts towards something more important? How can we put our efforts towards helping each other? Encouraging not just the enjoyment of freedoms, like with the free software movement, but like, can we help people be healthier in a more direct way, like by detecting fecal contamination in water? Part of this comes into and why we're at conferences like this, and we see harmony with the free software movement is, you know, who's going to own this stuff? Because patents and inventions need to be owned by people. Well, we think that's the opposite of how this should work. We want to harness the value of having multiple contributors to a project, and part of that is dedicating the resources to the public. So who really cares who owns it, right? Is the value of a free software project in who owns the copyrights on it? It's not. Because of the way the legal regime happens to work around software and copyrights, yeah, someone does own the copyrights. When it comes to inventions, patents aren't automatically granted. So we don't really care about who has a patent on this, right? We have to ask the question, are patents worth it for what we're trying to achieve? What we're trying to achieve is the betterment of humanity, distribution of the things that we create as wide a spectrum as possible. We don't need patents to restrict that flow. We don't need patents to encourage the distribution of it. So what we're trying to do is make sure they're available as widely as possible. So we're not going to seek patents because who cares? It doesn't add any value to us, and they're expensive. There's a talk this morning from McCoy Smith, who's a well-known free software attorney. He talked a lot about the patent process. One of the things that he pointed out is, you know, the best patent defense is a large bench of prior art. And that free software is great for that. That the way free software should defend against patented software is by creating more free software. I think it was also correct in making sure that free software is accessible to people by making sure there's documentation that you can actually get to it. You don't need to be the creator of it. You don't need to be a software developer of a high caliber of skill. The same thing with public inventions, right? Is how can we make the things that we create, the knowledge we create, accessible to everyone so they know what's been created. I've been in the field of free software law for a while. One of the things that questions I commonly get is, well, what about defensive patents? And I think if you watch McCoy's talk this morning, I really don't want to labor on that point, is it's prior art, right? So unlike with copyrights, you don't need to create it for other people and then license it out for people to have access to it. With inventions and with patentable goods, one of the things you can get a defensive patent, but those really help you in suing someone else because they violated your patent. If what you're really trying to do is just make sure people have access to knowledge, patent doesn't really help you. It just makes people scared about it. Not all knowledge needs to be owned. In fact, no knowledge should be owned. Patents are about owning knowledge. What we're about is trying to share that knowledge to encourage the world. So defensive patents really aren't worth it. If we had the $100,000 to patent an invention, which we probably have some patentable inventions already, especially with the GLESCON, we don't want to spend that on getting the patent just in case we have to sue someone for it. We'd rather spend that on creating more inventions, encouraging more people to build a better incubator. So the way that we encourage our defensive patent strategy is to publish everything, make it accessible, make it understandable to people. So let's publish everything and publish it right now in a public way.
Okay, so this is Rob speaking. What I would really love is to create a movement so that 20 years from now, so you can go to a cocktail party and someone asks you what you do and you say, I'm a public inventor, and everyone will understand what that means. Now, it can be difficult if you're young and broke, for example, to believe this. But over time, more and more invention will be done without a profit motive. In the future, I believe it will be the case that more people will be able to take 6 months off and spend time working on a free software project or a public invention hardware invention project, or both, than has ever been before. I know it doesn't feel that way to everybody, but probably the number of people who have the economic wherewithal to spend 6 months on a project has always been going up since the beginning of time. So I believe it will become a social trend. More and more inventions will be made freely available for anyone to use without a fee, and there will be more altruistic invention. Next slide, please. So in my mind, the public inventor is driven by a desire to help humanity. But as the free software movement has understood, everybody needs to be recognized. It's a fundamental human need. People are willing to give up money, but it's very important to thank people. It's very important to recognize their efforts. Everybody wants to be recognized. Of course, there's no reason you can't do that as a public inventor. You don't get a Ferrari, but you hopefully will get some recognition. In my mind, it's someone who chooses to spend their free time inventing things rather than making money, more money than they need. Now, that doesn't mean the same person who's a public inventor may not also be a for-profit inventor under different circumstances, just as now it's possible to move in and out of government services, et cetera. Wants to learn from and teach colleagues because we're very team-oriented. We believe the idea of the lone genius inventor, which has been popularized by Hollywood, is no longer applicable in the modern world. And so, in our mind, the public inventor is someone who wants to be part of a team. And so I'm sure some of the people listening to us now are public inventors. They may never have had that word to call it that. Next slide, please. So people like myself and like you who are free software advocates tend to be libertarian and tend to sort of oppose authority. So you can always ask the question, why do you need an organization? If you're trying to create a movement, what's the purpose of an organization? Now, Public Invention is a registered 501c3 charitable nonprofit, so it already exists, but why does it exist? Just like the Free Software Foundation doesn't control free software, yet it acts as a catalyst and perhaps sometimes as a guide and support of the free software movement. We believe an organization is needed because teams don't form themselves. Useful best practices should be established and written down and communicated. We want to match ideas to volunteers. And we want to collect and publish donated ideas. A few of the ideas that I mentioned, the 45 ideas which we've already published, in there, and those ideas are not well developed. They're like one-page ideas, have been donated by other people already, and we're happy to accept more. We would also like to funnel resources to resource-starved inventors. And by that, I mean material support. It's going to be 20 years before we pay someone to be a public inventor. Nonetheless, we may be able to buy an oscilloscope for a kid in the developing world who needs one to work on an invention idea, or support material costs such as developing a new kind of cook stove, which is going to be very expensive in material cost. Next slide, please. So let me just run through some things that I think will be particularly important. You can go to our website and see this. This is our basic mission statement and our values. We share everything equally and immediately. As Buckminster Fuller said, tell the truth, tell the whole truth, and tell it right now. So by doing that, from a legal point of view, we also produce an incontrovertible record of what we are producing. So we always work in the light, even if the light shows embarrassing stupidity. And if you look at what we have, you'll see some of that. I believe in keeping it real. I am a total fanboy. I love Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, all that stuff. I love Doctor Who, but the time of having the maker movement make TARDIS earrings or the maker movement developing toy lightsabers, I think we're ready to go beyond that. You know, I think it's time for the maker movement, which is
5 minutes until Q&A.
Thank you. And has a lot of energy to graduate to public invention, where you're starting to do real work. We don't build weapons, and we believe ideas are cheap. What's hard is the energy needed to go from the germination of an idea to something that really works. That's what's really difficult to get. Invention is not fundamentally egalitarian. Every invention is going to help someone more than someone else. But given a choice between the two, we're going to strive for egalitarian assistance to the world if we can achieve it. Collaborate whenever possible and honor and value every contribution. There are a lot of things which are not science, not math, not highfalutin stuff like social media, documentation, even photography and videography. Next slide, please. So this is fun. As Nietzsche said, nothing is good without a spirit of prankishness. And so this is a little bit of a prank. We have created the Fuller, the unit of humanitarian impact of an invention. And you of course, can find this at our website if you do it. And the idea here is my board came to me and said, well, how do we evaluate inventions? And what we came up with was to create a new kind of unit defined to be all of the inventions of Buckminster Fuller's lifetime as one Fuller. And so some of these things, like the printing press, are extraordinarily valuable. Next slide, please. However, public invention operates at the level of millifullers, and that's the thousandths of a fuller. So the projects that we can legitimately take on with the resources that we have are probably on the scale of 20 to 50 millifullers. But we believe that we can do that. Now, how would this be used? Well, I struggle right now because there's a call to make ventilators open source to help with the COVID-19 project. How do we evaluate that against the robot or that against the water project? I don't know. It's bound to be subjective. We know this is going to be a subjective thing, but the Fuller concept gives us a way to at least have the conversation. I can say, I believe an open source ventilator is a 100 millifuller project, and someone could disagree with me. Now, this could be applied to free software too. In the end, inventors have to follow their heart. Yes, we could all agree something is better, but for any one person, it might be better for them to operate on whatever they are called to do. Next slide, please.
So as part of this process, we're very committed, obviously, to doing things in the open. So we're in the process of developing some recommended geek practices around that. Rob already mentioned before, is trying to make all of our projects should be developed in the open, as in publicly available to other people. So having a public Git repo where you can record all of the progress in the project so that all of the mistakes and all of the progress is available there for anyone to contribute is really important to us. We believe in copyleft and its related concepts. We want to make sure that the things that we're creating are intended and directed towards improving humanity and getting the public benefit. And we think concepts like the GPL and a Faro GPL, where they're appropriate, make sense. We also want to make sure that people are able to get credit. A lot of the motivation in the academic world is about getting credit, enhancing your own career, and we think that's fair. Rob is an academic by training. It makes a lot of sense to do it that way. So we want to make sure attribution is there, but we also want to make the information easy to work with, right? So we don't want to be heavy-handed in terms of the attribution and restricting people. We want to make it easy to contribute. We want to make this documentation accessible in lots of ways. So, when McCoy talked earlier today about making documentation for free software projects is the best way to create prior art, I think that's right, which is why we have a YouTube channel to make things, if you can see what it is, right? Like, what is the gloss spot? For me, when I first got approached by Rob about trying to create public invention and stand it up as a proper organization, and he started talking about this robot, and I'm like, I just do not understand how this robot is, something that helps humanity. It seems like a toy. But when you see it and you start explaining it and seeing what it can do, you're like, oh, now I get it. Like, this is the kind of machine that you can change shape. It makes machines more accessible. You could bring this out into the middle of Africa and use it as a farming instrument. That's the kind of thing that's more powerful when you make it more accessible to more people so they can see the vision. Go ahead, Rob. This is you, Rob.
Is this for me, Mark?
Yeah.
Sorry. So we have some general practices that we believe are good. These come straight from the software movement. Most projects begin with a repo, and we create a technical paper on the first day, and we start thinking about the video that we're going to make. We aim for in-browser, zero deployment manifestations whenever possible. A lot of what we produce are what you might call calculators, and so an online browser deployed thing makes a lot of sense. We look for spinoffs. We had a mathathon, sort of a hackathon focused around math, and out of it came the segmented helices project, which I'm very proud of. I don't want to explain it. You can look it up. It's pretty geeky, but it's some of the best work that I've done. On all of these things, this is one way invention is a little different than a profit-driven thing. You start out making something, and sometimes the universe says, but I'm revealing to you something even more important that is found that way. Next slide, please. So in our opinion, the inventors matter more than the direction. So like we would like to say carbon sequestration is important. Drinking water is important. Ventilators are important. But really, it's supporting inventors doing what they are called to do that is most important. Nonetheless, global warming is something that we just have to address as a society. So we believe we should work at the thin boundary between science and engineering, in the sense that science is about discovering truth, engineering is about making compromises which allow that truth to be useful, and the thin boundary between the impossible and the trivial. So, for example, we don't have any idea how to make a time machine or a faster than light drive. Can we make a new flying machine? Maybe. So here are our calls to action. Contact us so we can help you find a project that resonates with you. You can donate to us a one-page invention idea if you abide by our principles and are willing to give it away free to the world and renounce the right to patent it, etc. Most importantly, become a invention coach. We really need people to lead projects, and this is a heavy lift. But if we finish the year with 5 invention coaches instead of 3, I'll be very happy. Find an invention project that resonates with you and offer help. Every skill is needed somewhere. Invention is sort of about math and science at one level, but design, art, graphic art, documentation, all those things are critically important. Next slide.
That's our last slide, Ron.
That's our last slide. Okay, so we're ready for questions. Mark is going to take questions and stop the sharing, and I'm going to get some things to show you.
Very good. Since we have a limited time left, I will keep things moving. Isla asks in the channel, what if, for example, GitHub, owned by a private entity, takes down a lesser-known, unmaintained repository on terms of violation claims to make prior art disappear at the time of patenting?
I mean, yeah, well, if that's the only copy of the repo and then yeah, that goes against the prior art thing. So people are free to choose how much they want to invest in public companies. I think the reality is today, and this is from a practical standpoint, never mind my own personal feelings about perhaps GitHub's business model or their value to the free software movement. It is a great way to communicate ideas. That's where a lot of people are. But the great thing about public invention and free software, right, is that there's lots of copies. So I've been in this space for about 10 years. I can tell you that when people sue for sue for software patents, going to GitHub was a fantastic resource for me because there's lots of stuff out there. And if I was directed towards a source code base, that's one of the places I would look. But there's also shows up in lots of other places too, right? Software Heritage Project is a fantastic project that's run out of the UN to help preserve these ideas so that you're not restricted to just, the goodwill of GitHub. But there are competitors. GitLab is doing it. Shout out to the Free Software Foundation. They're in the process of standing up another repository for hosting free software code. We think it's great, to have things that are open, and hopefully things like the Free Software Foundation will allow projects like Public Invention to participate and share code there as well. So, Rob,
do I need to talk for you guys to see this? Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
So this is the Tetrabot robot that is capable of crawling around. It kind of moves like a slug. It's kind of slow. I call it the glove dot. It's like that.
I will stop sharing my screen. I may not. I think I already did that. Rob was I guess in terms of that. Is there another question?
Yes. Tom Zane asks, how is a tool different than a weapon? Dr. Octopus tentacles are represented as tools in the slides, but represented as weapons in Hollywood movies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess they're not, right? I mean, all weapons are definitely tools, right? The purpose of public invention, though, is not to create tools that are intentionally can be used as weapons. Rather, the purpose of the public invention is to create tools that are useful to humanity, and killing people is not. So, would we create a laser gun? Yeah, probably with the intention if it's going to be some kind of laser scalpel, we'd be open to that. Are we going to create a laser gun to blow up the moon? Probably not. Don't see a lot of humanitarian benefits in that. But part of creating things in a humanitarian and free way is you have to trust people are going to act responsibly with their freedoms, right? That's no different than the creation of free software. That's a big concern in the free software community too. It's like some people don't want their free software to be used for powering weapons. We don't want our public inventions to be used to harm other people. The purpose is to benefit people, but you have to trust people to use that freedom appropriately. And we do trust people. We think on the whole, humanity does good things.
GTS asks, can you expand on the notion of mathematics is a social invention, please?
I mean, that's just, it's in a way I can see like it's very abstract, but also really obvious, right? The ability to count things, how much grain did you plant and how much you're going to harvest and record that over time so you can see patterns. The applications for math for benefiting society, to me, and Rob, feel free to share your eyes on this, like how many other inventions in the world have benefited humanity as much as math? Language. That's also absolutely an invention. These things did not exist until people started applying them to practical problems, and they have helped the world.
Question from Tom Zane. Have you considered hosting a PeerTube instance instead of YouTube?
No.
Yeah, so I think that's something that gets brought up in a lot of projects like ours, especially when you start a foundation, is how much should you do your own? And I think so far that where public invention comes from is we're looking at the resources that we have and the mission that we're focused on. And our mission is not directly focused on making sure that we're running a completely pure free software stack. We want to put our resources towards creating public inventions. So we want to use those existing resources out there. But projects like Media Goblin I think are fantastic projects. We definitely support people doing those kind of things, but that's not our purpose, is to run a Media Goblin instance. So we're trying to use existing platforms that are out there, but we definitely think about the implications of using those tools, but we also want to be practical about it as well.
We've come to the end of the questions, so if you'd like to make any closing comments and then finish, we are 1 minute. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We have another question coming through. This one here. We found it very challenging now to wait. Yes, found it very challenging how to include designs and device under copyright without losing the GPL transivity. Sorry for my pronunciation. For the derived works, what exactly do you define as free hardware, and what are the actual licenses are you using for it? Free hardware.
So the open hardware licensing, free hardware licensing, I'm sure that's a widely accepted term in the licensing world. It's a challenge. And our organization is not directed towards creating new licenses. Again, it's the same thing. Like, we're directed at creating useful inventions. So for us, creating free hardware is hardware that's accessible to the people who need it, not just the people who can pay for it. So we're going to try and use existing open hardware license, like the CERN license and the open hardware license and the GPL and the AGPL where appropriate. And we're trying to develop a more elaborate licensing policy. But some of what we create, like the incubator, like, it doesn't really need licensing. There's nothing much to be licensed there. We just want it to be available. So we're going to make the documentation available, and we'll do that underneath CC BY because we want it to travel far. And so far, we're not particularly concerned about the projects that we have value in distributing right now. It's not the kind of things that we're worried about making sure they stay free, because they kind of are inherently, and the fact that we publish the ideas and make them accessible will guarantee that freedom.
Thank you. That was a most excellent talk. I know we all enjoyed it, but we'll have to leave the questions there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. I'll stay in the IRC and answer a few more questions in the break time. Thank you.